Hey, St. Mark's. We're back with Nathan Blake this week for another week of winning the war in your mind.
Yeah.
And so I have just really enjoyed our time just digging into this book and just hearing from you and
Yeah.
from Pete on Sundays, and just been just informative to understand how our thoughts
Yeah.
Can kind of get into the role of believing things that maybe we shouldn't sometimes.
Yeah. Our thoughts impact so much about our life.
Mm-hmm.
And, this week, Pete's going to be talking a lot about perspective and context, and some of the terminology that the author uses are lenses.
Yeah.
And the lenses that we see the world through and how those kind of impact or influence our thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I know, like, when we were talking a little bit about like how our mindset can really make a difference
Yeah.
in our life and how it affects our attitude, and
Yeah.
not only from one aspect of our attitude, but it goes from attitude to our relationships to truthfully all of our whole life. So based on how you come into
Yes.
an experience or come into a or deal with a problem,
Yeah.
like how you have whatever is on your mind
Yes.
can really change. So if you are coming into it as a positive mindset,
Hmm.
it can make a total difference. And but then yet if I'm you know coming in it as a lie
Hmm.
or something, a lie that I believe,
Yeah.
it really can, that perspective can truly change the trajectory of
Oh my gosh.
what happens from then on.
Totally. Yeah, I see this most often with couples. I
Mhm.
work with a lot of couples, and the longer you're with someone, the more that you kind of form these opinions about what they're thinking. So often in my office, one of the things I talk about is that we will have a whole segment of arguments with our partner before anything is said because we've assumed what they are already thinking and feeling.
Right.
Right. So if I'm at home and my partner comes in from work and they have a just a sad face and they're just kind of down and they sling their bag on the kitchen table, the lens and perspective I see that through is going to influence the thoughts that I have about it.
Mm.
So if I see it through the perspective that what they're doing is personal, like, do they not care about me? I haven't seen them all day. Why are they not talking to me?
Yeah.
Are they mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Right? And so the lens that I'm looking at it through is my own lens.
Mhm.
I haven't paused enough to consider, well, maybe they've had a tough day.
Mm.
Maybe, their boss was mean to them, or they had a meeting that like didn't go well, or maybe they dropped the ball on a project they're working on, or maybe they don't feel well. But the lens that I'm looking at it through is a personal one,
Mm.
that surely their behavior is a direct influence on how they feel towards me.
Yeah.
And so that perspective, the way that I'm looking at somebody else's behavior can shift my thoughts if I can change the lens.
Mm.
If I can look at it through their lens, what are they experiencing? Accessing the compassion rather than assuming that their behavior is personal towards me.
Yeah.
And how often do we?
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I mean, as you're thinking and talking there, I was thinking that like how often I do that with Joey. Like
Yeah.
he'll come in and maybe he rushes by and
Yeah.
just puts something down on the table and then goes into the bedroom to do something, and I'm immediately like, well, what in the world?
What in the world? Yeah.
And
What's your problem?
yeah. And then that puts me into a bad attitude most of the time. And then usually it's like it's nothing. He wasn't even thinking that me standing there would have him not saying hello
Yeah.
or come and giving me a hug or a kiss,
Yeah.
and that it's but realizing, hey, there was something going on. He needed to put his stuff down to
Absolutely.
respond to an email really quick because he needed to make sure that he got it done before it was off his mind,
Right.
whatever it is.
Yeah. Have you ever walked into a social situation and just feeling particularly insecure about yourself and assume that people are talking about you, or maybe folks are looking at you in a judgmental way? And so as soon as that thought enters our mind, it colors the way that we see the interaction, right? If I go up to a group of people and my perspective is they are not going to accept me, or they were talking about me before I got here,
Mm,
that totally changes the way I'm going to show up and interact,
right.
because now I feel insecure. I'm already a little defensive. So if somebody, maybe they say something joking towards me, I might respond in a way that is way more pushing back on them
Hmm.
than they ever intended. Or you're sitting with a group of friends, and you hear them laughing and assume that they're laughing at you. I see this more in like children and teenagers.
Right.
But that we feel like we're being judged or laughed at.
Hmm.
It totally changes the lens through which I see that interaction. And so I think it's a reminder that our perspective, our thoughts are so influenced by our own perspective and the
Hmm.
lens through which we're seeing specific situations by.
What are some things that we can do to change our perspective, especially like, the example that you talked about when somebody's going in, maybe has some social anxiety
Yeah.
based on something that has happened in their past.
Hmm.
And what are some steps that can allow them to start changing
Yeah.
that thought process?
Well, I think part of it is what we've been talking about from the beginning, which is to become more aware of the thoughts we're having. So often, the thoughts that we have, we react to them.
Mm,
So if I have the thought, well, Jess doesn't like me, if I'm not pausing long enough to be curious about that thought,
mhm.
then I'm going to react to the way that my brain is manufacturing that scenario. And what I might do is be a little more standoffish.
Mm,
Or I may not talk
mhm.
to you as much because in my head I'm going, well, she doesn't like me. She doesn't care for me.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to talk to her because that's the lens that I see it through,
Mhm.
right? So one of the things we can do, I think, is kind of hit the pause button. That if we have that automatic negative thought, we get really curious about it and we go, oh, I'm having the thought that Jess doesn't like me. That is an insecurity within
Mhm.
myself. What and the author kind of talks a bit about this. He calls it digging truth trenches.
Mhm.
What's the truth? Well, the truth is Jess has never said one way or another,
Right.
but I have nothing. I have no evidence to support that Jess doesn't care for me. What I do have support of is that she's another human being who is just as flawed as I am, who has just as many things in her life that she's dealing with.
Mm,
And so, out of the understanding that we're both human beings trying to figure out this world together, now I'm going to go talk to her.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is so helpful for those of us that can have some social anxiety,
Yeah.
and I know, and I've had to learn that. And truthfully, you have to push yourself
You
to
do.
that, and because it can be uncomfortable, especially in groups of people that you may not know
Hmm.
very well.
And one of the things we have to realize is that when we go into a social situation, everyone has some kind of insecurity that
Hmm.
they're dealing with, something that they feel like other people won't like or might be judgmental of. And it's this reminder that social outlets cause us angst.
Hmm.
And when we feel anxious, there are probably other folks who feel the same way.
Right.
And so instead of the spotlight's on me, I'm the nervous one, there's this pause to remind ourselves everyone here may carry their own version of nervousness or
Hmm.
angst.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we are having some believing some of these lies that we tell ourselves, that the enemy tells us.
Yeah.
We can only think about ourselves,
Yeah,
and
you
we
got
get
it.
into that little box of,
Uh-huh.
well, whether we're thinking of ourselves as not enough or a victim or whatever it is that we're telling ourselves, we are no longer thinking of others
Yes.
at all. And if we can, like you said, pause and realize that we're all walking along this journey together,
That's right.
and that has probably been one of the most beneficial things about going through this study, is that I've never felt like I was alone, but didn't realize how many others struggled with the same insecurities that I do, and have come up to me and said that it's been beneficial for them to hear me mention that I struggle sometimes with not being enough, and in different circumstances. And so, like, I think that has been what's so beneficial to go on this journey with each other,
Yeah.
and realize that we all have these perspectives that we are
do.
looking at, and we all need to be a little more compassionate to each other.
Absolutely. This comes up for me. If I'm making a presentation to a group of folks who maybe have never heard the material I'm going to share, I have so much more confidence in myself, right? I'm confident in what I've written. I'm confident in what I'm presenting. But if I have to present to a group of my colleagues, boy, my whole perspective changes.
Yeah.
I start getting all of these intrusive and negative thoughts. Like, they're better read than I am. They are smarter than me. There are people in the room with PhDs. I don't have a PhD. There are all these thoughts. And this is where, and I think Pete's going to speak to this a bit in his sermon, but this is where context really matters. That sometimes the context can dictate kind of how our thoughts go. I can feel really secure in one context and be doing the exact same thing in another context and feel totally out of frame and get all kinds of negative thoughts.
Well, and I think what I've enjoyed about Craig's thoughts is just continuing to remind us to see through the lens of God's eyes.
Yeah.
And how if we do that pause, and we think of how we are beloved children of God, and the things that the devil tells us are not what God tells us, and that Pete talked about the trenches, and filling those trenches with the truth, and being able to know that it's seeing ourselves through God's eyes is what is most important, and seeing others through God's eyes.
What does that mean for you, to see yourself through God's eyes?
I think for me, for my lie, anyways, the perfection lie is that that God is with me. And that through Him I'm made perfect. And
that you are who you're supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. And that it's a He's walking alongside of me every way, and even though I do have weaknesses, and being able to share those weaknesses, in that in those weaknesses God makes me strong, and relying on Him during those weaknesses have been what has been so that's where I have moved forward in like no matter how much I try to control things, even though I can say, well, I'm strong in this, I'm strong in this, I usually stay still, but it's through God that pushes, walks alongside of me in my weakness. That's where I move forward.
And isn't that where we find strength with one another?
Right.
In our weaknesses.
Yeah.
Right. That it makes me think of Henry Nouwen's book, The Wounded Healer. That out of our wounds is where we find healing for those around us. That concept of that our weakness is really where we find strength in one another. I think it's the case too for us as couples.
Yeah.
That in our weakness we find strength in one another.
Mm-hmm.
And before we go, I think you had a passage to share.
Yeah. The Romans 12. It's just something that really spoke to me for this time. Is the do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And like that realization of the pattern of the world will make us continue to believe those lies that you have to be perfect, because in the world, like there is an expectation of
There can be,
right. And so like that just that renewing of your mind, and like Craig in the book says, digging those trenches of truth, reminding yourself what the truth is, has been just a great benefit for me in this time. For sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully you guys enjoy your study time this week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.